Neo-colonialism and the last neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Where the fuck was? What's it? Africa's resources? Yeah, I think that's right. Obstacles to economic progress. Yeah, yeah, that works. That works. Right. Chapter 2: Obstacles to economic progress. Speaking of West Africa in 1962, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa pointed out few other regions of the world show such a multitude of very small states, both as far as production and population go. The only similar region of some importance is Central America. West Africa is in fact divided into 19 separate independent states. It includes two colonial enclaves. Possessed by Spain and Portugal. The population of the area is about a third of the total population of Africa. Yet the average population of the independent countries, if Nigeria is excluded, is about 2 to 3 million. 2 to 3 million? 2 out of 3? 2 to 3 million. It is, however, illusionary. It is, however, illusory to regard even Nigeria as an exception to the balkanization policy practiced by the departing colonial rulers. The constitution imposed on Nigeria at independence divided the country into three regions, which have since grown to four, mostly joined on a federal basis, but with sufficient powers left to the regions to cripple overall economic planning. If the other states of West Africa are examples of political balkanization, Nigeria is an example of economic balkanization. Ghana, with a population of over 7 million, only escaped a similar fate by the resistance put up by the Convention People's Party government to a British plan which would have created no less than 5 regions, some with a population of less than 1 million, yet each possessing sufficient powers to defeat central planning. Actually, I need to move this over just slightly. Kenya, which was also forced to accept at independence a similar type of constitution, has only recently been able to establish a unified regime. When France was faced with the possibility of being forced to accept some form of independence, or at least self government, for the territories of the old colonial federations of French West and Equatorial Africa, a series of balkanization measures were adopted by the French government. The Loi Cadre of 1956 established the frontiers of the present French-speaking states. The dismantling process begun by the Loi Cadre was completed by the referendum of 1958 on the Constitution of the French Fifth Republic. Each of the territories established by the Loi Cadre was called upon to decide separately whether it wished to remain an overseas territory of France, and autonomous republic within the French community, or to be independent. Teresa Hayter, a research assistant of the British Overseas Development Institute in April 1965, in the April 1965 issue of the Journal of the British Royal Institute of International Affairs, has described the process. The territories were to make separate decisions. It was therefore they and not the federations of West and Equatorial Africa which were legally to inherit France's powers. No provision was made for strengthening the federal institutions, and in fact they were dismantled after the referendum and came formally to an end in April 1959. The original purpose of the federations had been to enable the colonies to pay for themselves through a reallocation of their revenues. Senghor, in particular, has bitterly accused France of balkanizing Africa in the Oi cadre. With the choice so loaded, only Guinea voted against the constitution. All the others became autonomous republics, members of the Franco-African community. Fearing that the example of Guinea might be followed by other states which had decided to join the community, the French government removed everything of value from the territory. Administrators and teachers were withdrawn. Documents and even electric light bulbs were removed from government buildings. Financial assistance, trade support, and the payment of pensions to Guinean war veterans were discontinued. Despite the pressure placed on Guinea in this way, the remaining French states were forced by internal pressure to seek political independence. Wait a minute. This destroyed the concept usually associated with General de Gaulle. This destroyed the conception usually associated with General de Gaulle, the originator of the French community, of a non-sovereign group of African states, each separately linked to France. One after another, the autonomous republics obtained international sovereignty, but under such adverse conditions that they had, in fact, to maintain all the military, financial, and the republics obtained international sovereignty, but under such adverse conditions that they had, in fact, to maintain all the military, financial, commercial, and economic links of the previous colonial period. In order to exist at all as independent states, these former French territories were forced to accept French aid, even to meet their recurrent expenses. French aid to developing countries is, in proportion to the French national income, the highest in the world and is, in absolute terms, the second highest. Nearly all of this aid is absorbed by commitments in Africa, and nearly half of it goes to the 14 states which were previously autonomous republics and whose combined population is only slightly larger than that of Nigeria. Aid of this type can dictate African relations with the developed world and, as experience has shown, can be extremely dangerous to the recipients. French African aid originally arose from the advantage which French firms and individuals derived from the African franc zone, and this has determined the framework in which the aid is still provided, so long as the relationship which the aid provided was profitable to France, it naturally continued. It was, in effect, a levy on French taxpayers for the benefit of French individuals and firms. The overall value of the policy to France was that in return for guaranteed markers, the overall value of the policy to France was that in return for guaranteed markets and prices for colonial primary products such as coffee, cocoa, groundnuts, bananas, and cotton, the African states had to import from France fixed quantities of certain goods such as machinery, textiles, sugar, and flour, which were then uncompetitive in price or surplus in Europe. And in addition, the states were forced to limit their imports from countries outside the franc zone. While this scheme made nonsense of any plan for inter-African trade, it was, for a period, highly profitable to France. With the fall in the world price of primary commodities, these profits began to diminish, as did enthusiasm for aid in France. At the present moment, the most which can be said in favor of French aid is that it does not now, as it did in the past, make an actual profit for France from the less developed states of its former African empire. Teresa Hayter sums it up. France does not gain in its transactions with the states, nor does it lose. Aid, private investment, French government expenditures, and imports from them are balanced by exports to them. Repatriation of capital and remittances of profits and salaries. This state of affairs is considered to be no longer of value to France. The Giannini report, published in 1964 and expressing the official French view, pointed out that the protective system of the French zone was no longer in the interest of France, and the report, therefore, advocated the redeployment of French aid. In any event, France had to comply with her obligations to the European Common Market under the new Convention of Association, which came into force in the summer of 1964. 6 members of the European Common Market are to achieve in stages a free trade area, and this will no longer make it possible for France to discriminate in favor of the African states, nor for these states to discriminate against France's common market partners. Exports from these states will, by the end of the 5-year period, have to be aligned to world prices. In consequence, the primary production, which they have built up on the strength of the promise of guaranteed markets and prices, is likely to fail to be competitive in world conditions. It is difficult to see how Senegal, in particular, can manage without a French subsidy for their groundnuts. And President Senghor has already called attention to the serious economic position into which this puts his country. In fact, the limited neo-colonialism of the French period is now being merged in the collective neo-colonialism of the European Common Market, which enables other states, hitherto outside the French preserve, to profit by the system. It also rationalizes the division of Africa into economic zones based upon Europe by drawing in four other states: the Congo, Leopoldville, Burundi, and Rwanda are, as previous Belgian colonies, tied to the Belgian economic system, and Somalia, through its previous association with Italy, is also brought in as an associated state of the common market. A grouping such as this raises the wider problems of African neocolonialism and emphasizes its irresponsible nature. Of the states carved out of the former French colonies, one, Guinea, has been able, with great suffering and losses, it is true, to cut free from the tap of neocolonialist control imposed on the others. Mali has been forced to accept some of the rules and regulations which govern the relations of the former French colonies to France, but at least she has set up her own currency, limit transfers of money abroad, and receives from France only a partial guarantee of the parity of her currency with the French franc. In the case of all the other states, their currencies have been stabilized on a fixed parity with the French franc and have a total guarantee from the French treasury. These states pay their receipts of French francs into operation accounts in the French treasury. These accounts can be overdrawn, and the states can draw on them against their own currencies in an unlimited extent. Obviously, however, whatever the theoretical position, the international financial position of these countries is subject to control, and that at any time their operation accounts in the French treasury could be blocked, as was done in the case of Guinea. Most, at any rate, of the states concerned lacked the strength to stand up against such pressure as did Guinea. Why then, it may be asked, are these powers not sufficient to enable France to persuade these states to follow present French foreign policy, which is based upon a third force concept? France did not support the United States and Belgium in their humanitarian intervention in Stanleyville in the Congo. Unlike Britain and other common market countries, France has openly opposed the United States policy in Santo Domingo, has recognized the People's Republic of China, and has recommended the neutralization of Vietnam. Yet, only a minority of the African states, which appear to be under French neo-colonial control, have followed the French line. The majority of them refuse to recognize China or in any way criticize the United States policy. Indeed, they behave in a fashion suggestive of being under United States rather than French influence. The answer to this apparent paradox will, I believe, be found in the following chapters of this book, in which I attempt to explain the power and ramifications of international financial control. Here, one has a super state which can at times even override the policy wishes of the nominal neo-colonial master. Oh shit. I want to go look back over that paragraph. Yeah. Oh man. The control of the funds of the French neo-colonial African states is exercised by the Administrative Council of their central banks, which are composed partly of Frenchmen without whose agreement no decision in monetary policy can be taken. This French banking complex, with its absolute control of the currencies and external payments of the French neo-colonial states, could, in theory, dictate that these states follow French policy. However, the complex is itself subject, in the manner later described, in external pressures which support United States rather than French policies, where a difference of opinion arises. Part of the value of commencing a study of neocolonialism in its African context is that it provides examples of every type of the system. It is impossible to define the African situation in terms of independent states. Divided into the non-aligned and the neo-colonialist camp, colonies and racialist states such as South Africa. In Africa, all former colonies, which have now become independent, including particularly South Africa, are subject to in some degree to neo-colonialist pressures, which, however much they wish to resist, they cannot entirely escape, struggle as they may. The difference in reality is between those states that accept neocolonialism as a policy and those which resist it. Similarly, the colonial problem of Africa is in many ways really neo-colonial. The Portuguese African territories appear at first sight only to raise the issue of freedom from colonial rule, but in fact they exist as colonies only because Portugal is itself a neo-colonial state. For the last 50 years, the great powers have regarded the Portuguese colonies as counters which they can exchange between themselves in order to readjust the balance of power. In 1913, the British and Germans had in 1913, the British and Germans had initialed an agreement for their division, and this was only prevented by the outbreak of the First World War. In the appeasement period prior to the Second World War, when it was thought that Hitler could be bought off by an offer of colonial territory, the Portuguese colonies were again regarded as the suitable bribe. If Portugal controls these colonies, now it is only because of the military strength which she derives through her NATO alliance. Portugal is, however, not a member of NATO because of any military assistance which she could render the alliance, but because this is a convenient way by which Portuguese territory can be made available to the forces of other members of the alliance. At the other end of the scale is the French colony of Somalia. It continues to exist as a colony not because France would resist pressure to grant it independence, but because of African disunity. It is a point of dispute between Somalia and Ethiopia. African disunity maintains this colony. If it were to go to either of its neighbors, it would almost inevitably provoke a conflict between them. Rhodesia, while theoretically a colony, is really a fossilized form of the earliest type of neocolonialism which was practiced in southern Africa until the formation of the Union of South Africa. The essence of the Rhodesia system is not to employ individuals drawn from the people of the territory itself to run the country, as in the newer type of colonial state, but to utilize instead an alien minority. The majority of the European ruling class of Rhodesia only came to the colony after the Second World War, but it is they and not the African inhabitants who outnumbered them 16 to 1. That British regards as the government. This racial state is protected from outside pressure because, under international law, it is a British colony, while Britain herself excuses her failure to exercise her legal rights to prevent the oppression and exploitation of the African inhabitants of which, of course, she officially disapproves, because of a supposed British parliamentary convention. In other words, by maintaining Rhodesia nominally as a colony, Britain in fact gives her official protection as a second South Africa, and the European racialists are but free to treat the African inhabitants as they will. Shit. The Rhodesian system thus has all the hallmarks of the neo-colonial model. The patron power, Britain, awards to a local government over which it claims to have no control, unlimited rights, and exploitation within the territory. Yet Britain still retains powers to exclude other countries from intervening, either to liberate its African population or to bring its colony into some other zone of influence. The maneuvering over Rhodesia's independence is an excellent example of the workings of the neo-colonialism and the practical difficulties to which the system gives rise. A European minority of less than 250,000 could not maintain, in the conditions of Africa today, rule over 4 million Africans without external support from somewhere. When the settlers talk of independence, they are not thinking of standing on their own feet, but merely of seeking a new neo-colonialist master who would, in their view, be more reliable than Britain. As will be seen from the chapters which follow, a modern neo-colonialism is based upon the control of nominally independent states by giant financial interests. These interests often act through or on behalf of a particular capitalist state. They are quite capable of acting on their own and forcing those imperial countries in which they have a dominant interest to follow their lead. There is, however, an older type of neocolonialism which is based primarily on military considerations. Wait, what the hell? Oh. A world power, having decided on principles of global strategy that it is necessary to have a military base in this or that nominally independent country, must ensure that the country where the base is situated is friendly. Here is another reason for balkanization. If the base can be situated in a country which is so constituted economically that it cannot survive without substantial aid from the military power which owns the base, then, so it is argued, the security of the base can be assured. Like so many of the other assumptions on which neo-colonialism is based, this one is false. The presence of foreign bases arouses popular hostility to the neo-colonial arrangements, which permit them more quickly and more surely than does anything else. The presence of foreign bases arouses popular hostility to the neo-colonial arrangements, which permit them more quickly and more surely than it does anything else, and throughout Africa these bases are disappearing. Libya may be quoted as an example of how this policy has failed. Actually, I want to quickly take a screenshot of that paragraph because I do like the one part in the middle of that. Oh, I clicked the wrong damn button. I hate it whenever I do that. Ah, son of a bitch. Wait, yes. Uh, oh, no, no, no. Uh, shit. I did not want to open Edge. Fuck you, Edge. I clicked on you by accident. Alright. I just. Oh, I just saw a wild ass take, and I want to forget I saw that because that was just silly. Alright, where was that? Oh, yeah. Interesting bringing up Libya. That makes me. So this was written around in the 60s. I wonder what Libya was like at the time. Because I uh, I don't have very much knowledge of a bunch of countries' histories in Africa and the Middle East, and I guess in Asia, some parts of Asia too. Makes me want to know what the history was. So I know, I think Italy controlled it as a colonial area around the time of World War II. After that, who knows where it went to? You know, they wouldn't have kept it as a colonial area after uh, the war. And so my thought is, when exactly did uh, what's his face come to power? Oh shit, what's his name? Uh, I can't even think of his name. That is pretty sad. The guy that got overthrew in. Well, that was the wrong damn button. Oh yeah, non-aligned movement. Uh, yeah, area of the North African campaign. Independent Kingdom in 1951. A bloodless military coup, 1969, initiated by a coalition led by Gaddafi, overthrew King Idris I and created a republic. Gaddafi was often described by critics as a dictator, as one of the longest serving non royal leaders, ruling for 42 years. He ruled until being overthrown and killed in the 2011 Libyan Civil War. Authority transferred to the General National Congress. By 2014, two rebel authorities claimed to govern Libya. Parts of destabilizing the country and leading to a second civil war, with parts of Libya split between the Tobruk and Tripoli-based governments, as well as various tribal and Islamist militias. I want to look up the Republic. Declared its independence as the United Kingdom of Libya. The Constitution. Wait. No. I want. 69, a group of rebel military officers, Gaddafi, launched a coup d'etat, which became known as the Al Fatah Revolution. Gaddafi was referred to as the brother, leader, and guide of the revolution in government statements in the official Libyan press. Moving to reduce Italian influence, in October 1970, an Italian-owned assets were expropriated. The 12,000-strong Italian community was expelled from Libya alongside the smaller community of Libyan Jews. The day became a national holiday known as Vengeance Day. Libya's increase in prosperity was accompanied by increased internal political repression. Political dissent was made illegal under Law 75 and 19. Excuse me. Establishing Revolutionary Women's Formation to encourage reform. Whoops. The laws introduced affirming equality of the sexes, insisting on wage parity. Damn. From 1977 onward, per capita income in the country rose to more than 11,000 US dollars, the fifth highest in Africa, while the Human Development Index became the highest in Africa and greater than that of Saudi Arabia. This was achieved without borrowing any foreign loans, keeping Libya debt-free. The Great Man-Made River was also built to allow free access to fresh water across large parts of the country. In addition, financial support was provided for university scholarships and employment programs. Oh shit, look at his face. Arab nationalist, interesting. Uh, Third international theory, what? Initially, ideologically committed to Arab nationalism and Arab socialism, he later ruled according to his own Third International theory. What is this? The style of government proposed by uh, Muammar Gaddafi in the early 1970s, in which his government, the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arabic Jamahiriya, was officially based. It was partially inspired by Islamic socialism, African nationalism, and partly by the principles of direct democracy. It has similarities with the system of Yugoslav municipal self-management in Titoist Yugoslavia, and the Yugoslav Third Way during the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, as developed by Edvard Kardelj. It was also heavily inspired by Mao Zedong thought and the Three Worlds theory. It was proposed by Gaddafi as an alternative to capitalism and Marxist-Leninism for third world countries, based on the stated belief that both of these ideologies had been proven invalid. The Higher Council of National Guidance was created to disseminate and implement this theory, and it found partial realization in Libya, a self-proclaimed utopian model state. The fall of Gaddafi and his death in 2011 led to the establishment of his system and its replacement by the National Transitional Council. Ooh, the Green Book, you say? I'm gonna have to check that out. First published in 1975, is said to be inspired in part by the Little Red Book, quotations from Chairman Mao. Both widely distributed both inside and outside the country of origin, and written in a simple, understandable style with many memorable slogans. An English translation was issued by the Libyan People's Committee, and a bilingual English-Arabic edition was issued in London by Martin, Bryan, and O'Keefe in 1976. During the Libyan Civil War, copies of the book were burned by anti-Gaddafi demonstrators. Rejects both capitalism and communism, as well as representative democracy. Instead, it proposes a type of direct democracy overseen by the General People's Committee, which allows direct political participation for all adult citizens. The book states that freedom of expression is a natural right of every person, even if they choose to behave irrationally. To express his or her insanity, the Green Book states that freedom of speech is based upon public ownership of book publishers, newspapers, television, and radio stations on the grounds that private ownership would be undemocratic. A paragraph in the book about abolishing money is similar to a paragraph in Frederick Engels' Principles of Communism. Gaddafi wrote, "The final step is when the new social society reaches the stage where profit and money disappear. It is through transforming society into a fully productive society and through reaching in production level where the material needs of the members of society are satisfied. On that final stage, profit will automatically disappear and there will be no need for money. Uh, but what usually occurs is that representative democracies are established the will of large populations who did not vote for assisting governments using first past votes electoral systems. Political parties also assert the people's authority, focus on maintaining power instead of improving society for all. Proper objective government. First, political parties are susceptible to corruption. Damn, Green Book sounds pretty nice. Except for its. I reject capitalism and communism. Anyway. Alright. That's enough of that. Libya has had a long colonial history. From the 16th century onwards, it was a Turkish colony. But in 1900, in the heyday of colonialism, France and Italy agreed that if Italy would not oppose France occupying Morocco, France would not oppose Italy occupying Libya. So when in 1911 and 1912 France was occupying Morocco, Italy went to war with Turkey and defeating her annexed Libya. Despite promises during the Second World War to the people of Libya that they would never again be subjected to Italian rule, France tried at the peace settlement to have Italy reinstalled in order to support her own position in Tunisia. This solution proving impossible, Libya became nominally independent, but actually under British neo-colonial control. Hey, Alex Jones was right. Thanks for the follow. I mean, Alex Jones is definitely not right, but he can be a hilarious individual. That is for damn sure. According to figures collated by the British Overseas Development Institute, during the period 1945 to 1963, Libya received no less than 17% of the total bilateral aid which Britain gave to all foreign countries outside the Commonwealth in that period. The Overseas Development Institute notes that although these payments to Libya are counted as aid, there is no doubt that they are in essence straightforward payments to the Libyan government in return for the use of bases. Nevertheless, popular pressure in Libya has now made it necessary for the Libyan government to terminate the military agreement for British bases. These limitations on the real independence of many countries in Africa should not be allowed to obscure the great achievements already gained in the struggle for African independence and unity. Oh. In 1945, Africa largely comprised the colonial territories of European powers. And the idea that the greater part of the continent would be independent within 20 years would have seemed impossible to any political observer in the immediate post-war period. Yet, not only has independence been achieved, but considerable progress has been made towards the establishment of African unity. To this unity, there are still powerful obstacles, but they are no greater than the obstacles already overcome, and, if their nature is understood, they are clearly surmountable. Alrighty, uh, already, and this will ultimately be the decisive factor. The mass of the African people support unity in the same way as they previously supported the various local movements for political independence. Many of the political leaders of French West Africa, for example, did not at first support independence. In 1946, the French National Assembly, of which he has been a member, M. Hu Fouet Boigny, the president of the Ivory Coast, claimed there is no separatist on these beaches. There is a powerful bond, capable of resisting all tests, a moral bond which unites us. It is the ideal of liberty, fraternity, equality, for whose triumph France has never hesitated to sacrifice its most noble blood. The same policy of the maintenance of unity with France was also supported at that time by President Senghor of Senegal, who said, "The French Union must be a conjunction of civilizations, a melting pot of culture. It is a marriage rather than an association." It was mass pressure for independence which forced these leaders to reverse their previous positions and to declare themselves in favor of national sovereignty. In the same way as mass pressure made it impossible for an African leader to oppose independence, so today mass pressure makes it impossible for him openly to oppose African unity. Those who are against it can only show their opposition in indirect ways, by suggesting that the pace towards it is too fast, that this or that plan is impractical, or that there are procedural difficulties which prevent them assisting in formulating a practical plan for it. The case for African unity is very strong, and the instinct of the mass of the people right. It is only when the artificial boundaries that divide her are broken down so as to provide for viable economic units, and ultimately a single African unit, that Africa will be able to develop industrially, for her own sake, and ultimately for the sake of a wealthy world economy. A common currency is needed, and communications of all kinds must be developed to allow the free flow of goods and services. What? Oh, you little brat. The Economic Commission for Africa has repeatedly emphasized the need for economic planning on a continental scale. The inadequacy of national planning can be demonstrated at a glance at the economies of, for example, Mali, the Upper Volta, Niger, and Uganda. These landlocked states, which export large quantities of food products to other African states, cannot remain indifferent to the agricultural self sufficiency schemes adopted by their neighbors. Similarly, a national government planning the establishment of a new industry may find that a neighboring state is developing one like it. Such duplication would probably result in wasted resources if each was depending on exporting its surplus to its neighbor. Uh, what the hell? Who was? Oh, okay then. Uh, Motherfucker. Yeah, yeah. Ah, that's right. Every time I do this, I gotta change notifications. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Via would argue against the need for economic planning on a national scale. How much stronger is the argument for continental planning? The modern trend is towards larger economic and political units as interdependence of nations and peoples grow. No country can be completely self sufficient or afford to ignore political events outside its borders. Africa is currently fragmented into too many small, uneconomic, and non viable states, many of whom are having a very hard struggle to survive. As already noted, others have had to cling to old ties with former colonial rulers and have become easy prey to neo-colonialist forces. Some of them have found themselves, whether they liked it or not, drawn into the Cold War and into the rivalries between foreign powers. The Congo is a notable example. Naturally, each national government is concerned primarily with the welfare of its own citizens. It would only be expected to agree to a policy of unification if the immediate and long term benefits became so apparent that it would be positively damaging to its citizens not to cooperate. Not to cooperate. We are faced here with the problem of uneven economic growth. Some African countries are richer in natural resources than others. The less fortunate will need reassuring that their interests will not suffer at the hands of the more developed states. Past economic union experience has not been encouraging. The making of the Rhodesians and Nyasaland benefited chiefly southern Rhodesia. Kenya has Kenya has gained principally from the East African Common Market. Uganda and Tanganyika being at best only marginal gainers. In the former French colonial federations, the benefits of economic unity tended to center in Brazzaville, Abidjan, and Dakar. These examples further strengthen the argument for continentally planned economic growth so that all states can benefit from industrialization and other improvements made possible by unified direction. The richer countries will be able to help the poorer. Resources can be pooled and development projects coordinated to raise the living standards of every African. Oh, alright. Or was it every African? Yeah. The talent factor is important. As ECA has pointed out, now is the time to act, before each state gets too deeply involved in major investment and structural decisions based on narrow national markets. With each month that passes, the foreign interests of neo-colonialism get a tighter grip on Africa's economic life. Yeah, this was written in like the 60s, so yeah. Just thinking how bad the grip is now. The comparatively recent penetration of American big business into Africa points once again to the danger from neocolonialism. So also does the what the hell was that? The comparatively recent penetration of American big business into Africa points once again to the danger from neocolonialism. So also does the combining of large firms to form powerful monopolies. How can some of our smaller states hope to bargain successfully with powerful foreign combines, some of which control financial empires worth more than the state's total revenue? The smaller the state, and the more formidable the foreign interests, the less likely are the conditions for economic independence to be met. For example, Ghana, because of its economic size and alternative industries, has been in a stronger position for bargaining with the aluminum companies than much smaller, economically more limited Togo can hope to be in dealing with French phosphate interests. The domination of America's economy by foreign firms must be ended if we are to achieve rounded economic growth, and this can only be done through unified action. Every time I see aluminum now, I think of the two different spellings or pronunciations uh, aluminum or aluminium, and it it screws up my mind so much. It messes with my mind so much. Something in the nature of an economic revolution is required. Our development has been held back for too long by the colonial type economy. We need to reorganize entirely so that each country can specialize in producing the goods and crops for which it is best suited. Oh, yeah, whenever there's two pronunciations like that, sometimes I'll actually go in between which one I'll use uh, when saying the word. Or sometimes I'll say one and then I'll immediately say the other. Because I'm not sure which one I prefer or something like that. I don't know. I'm weird like that. I can't explain that. I don't know why I do it, but I do it. It's dumb. With the economic unity, those countries in Africa which are beginning to establish modern industries would benefit from wider markets. We would all be in a better bargaining position to obtain higher prices for our goods and to establish adequate taxation of foreign factor earnings. In fact, a whole new pattern of economic development would be made possible. Agriculture could be modernized more quickly with more capital at its disposal. Industries on a larger and more economic scale could be planned. These could afford to make use of new techniques involving heavy capital outlay. Smaller plants planned to meet only national needs are likely to have higher costs and are eventually less able to reduce costs than optimum sized units. National planning bodies would still have a very important part to play in a unified Africa. They would, for example, supply essential information about local conditions, but their work would be made easier with the experienced advice and help of a single planning body keeping an eye on Africa's interest as a whole. The research and training and development projects already being carried out by the ECA Development Institute in Dakar would be strengthened to serve both the continental and national bodies. Expensive failures due to lack of coordination would be avoided. A case in point in the Inga Dam project, which is to provide power for a sugar refinery, a plastics and hardboard from sugarcane waste complex to Bangui, which in turn will ship bulk plastics to a plastic products industry in Brazzaville. Obviously, there should be a planning body able to phase and harmonize construction timing for the Brazzaville and the Bengai plants. The power lines from Inga to Bengai and Brazzaville, and the transportation services between Bengai and Brazzaville, and the dam itself. Yeah. In the process of obtaining economic unity, there is bound to be much hard bargaining between the various states. Integration of different aspects of economic policy will proceed at different rates, and there may be disappointing delays and compromises to be worked out. But given the will to succeed, difficulties can be resolved. In general, The broader the front on which economic unity is launched, the quicker the goals and policies of a fully developed Africa can be achieved. An all African planning body could take immediate steps towards the development of large scale industry and power, for the removal of barriers to inter African trade, and for the creation of a central bank and the formation of a unified policy on all aspects of export control, tariff and quota arrangements, and the ECA has carried out several surveys designed to provide information to help in the making of decisions on these points. Among immediate needs are the manufacture in Africa of agricultural machinery of all kinds to speed up the modernization of agriculture. We need supplies of electrical equipment for use in the growing electrical. We need supplies of electrical equipment for use in the growing electric power production essential for economic growth. Mining and industrial machinery must be produced in Africa to lower the cost of developing our mineral resources. Construction machinery and supplies, chemicals, fertilizers, plastics are all urgently required, and Africa must produce them for her own requirements. Reports of the ECA Industrial Coordination Mission to different regions in Africa suggest that the production of iron and steel, non-ferrous metals, engineering supplies, chemicals and fertilizers, cement, paper, and textiles should be developed on an inter-African basis since their efficiency depends on large-scale production. Other industries which can run efficiently on a smaller scale can be planned nationally. The location of the various industries will, of course, depend on many factors, such as the availability of power, mineral deposits, nearness to processing plants, markets, and so on. Wait, the location of various industries will, of course, depend on many factors, such as the availability of power, mineral deposits, nearness to processing plants, markets, and so on. Production of aluminum and copper, for example, will have to be developed in those countries where the essential resources or in cheap power are available. The manufacturing of aluminum and copper products, however, need not take place in the country producing the metals. Similarly, the production of cotton is limited to certain climatic regions, while cotton textile industries can be developed further afield. Every African state has some contribution to make to the economic whole. There are, for instance, no known deposits of potash in West Africa, but requirements can be met from North Africa, Ethiopia, and possibly also from the Congo, Brazzaville, and Gabon. Plans for nitrogenous fertilizer production in Zambia have already been worked out. The plant could be supplied with coal from Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and will cost power from the Victoria Falls. Kenya, with its large forest reserves, could become the center of a wood distillation complex able to supply the countries of East and Central Africa with gas, acetone, methanol, and tar. There are many other examples too numerous to describe. The urgent need to plan industrial development on a continental scale must not, however, blind us to the equally important need to do the same for agriculture. fishing, and forestry. The role of industry in development, some fallacies. In the role of industry in development, some fallacies, Dudley Sears has pointed out the interdependence of agriculture and industry. Materials are needed for growing industries. More important, the swelling town labor force needs to be fed, and this implies that a rising surplus of food has to be produced in the countryside. To overemphasize industry, as some countries have found to their cost, leads paradoxically to, in the end, to a slower rate of industrialization. African states are importing larger amounts of food than ever before from abroad. This trend must be stopped by a carefully planned expansion of our own agriculture. As an industry, there can be specialization so that each region or state concentrates on producing the agricultural products for which it is best suited. For instance, it is wasteful for each West African state to try to be self-sufficient in rice when Senegal's Casamance district would be well able to supply the need. Equally, Mali and the Upper Volta are obvious exporters of fresh, tinned, and processed meat, while coastal states would supply fresh, tinned, and smoked fish. A further argument for a unified agricultural policy is implied in the need to step up efforts to combat many of the obstacles to economic growth. Locusts, the tsetse fly, and plant diseases are no respecters of political frontiers. Research into their control would benefit from a pooling of brainpower and technical know-how. So also would medicine and social services. How much greater the chance of wiping out major epidemic diseases like river blindness and sleeping sickness if action against them is coordinated and unified. Did I say the name of that right? Is it this CC Fry? Yeah.
CC.
CC. The advantage of unified military and diplomatic policies, both for our own security and to achieve freedom for every part of Africa, are so obvious as to need no comment. Transport and communications are also sectors where unified planning is needed. Roads, railways, waterways, airlines must be made to serve Africa's needs, not the requirements of foreign interests. Communications between African states are quite inadequate. In many cases, it is still easier to travel from an airport in Africa to Europe or America than to go from one African state to another. Wait, what? For real? That's fucked up. That is fucked up. It's easier to go from Africa to Europe, back to Africa than. Oh, it's easier to go just from Africa to Europe or America than it is from African state to African state. It's not saying from Africa to Europe to African state. Okay, I thought it was saying it's easier to go from one African state to Europe to a different African state than to just going from an African state to another African state. Okay. Because if it left out the second African state part of with the European part. Because man, if it was like that, that's even more fucked up than what it was saying. Economic unity, to be effective, must be accomplished by political unity. The two inseparable, each necessary for future greatness of of our continent and the full development of our resources. There are several examples of major unions of states in the world today. In Africa Must Unite, I describe some of the more important ones and warned against the danger of regional federations in Africa. Excuse me. Africa today is the main stepping ground of the neo-colonialist forces that seek the domination of the world for the imperialism they serve. Spreading from South Africa, the Congo, the Rhodesias, Angola, Mozambique, they form maze-like connections. Wait. No, that was singular, not plural. Spreading from South Africa, the Congo, the Rhodesias, Angola, Mozambique, they form a maze-like connection with the mightiest international financial monopolies in the world. These monopolies extending their banking and industrial organizations throughout the African continent. Their spokesmen push their interest in the parliaments and governments of the world and sit on the international bodies that are supposed to exist for the promotion of world peace and the welfare of the well-developed countries. Against such a formidable phalanx of forces, how can we move? Certainly not singly, but in a combination that will give strength to our bargaining power and eliminate so many of the duplications that give greater force and greater advantage to the imperialists in their strategy of neocolonialism. Decolonization is a word much and what? Gratuitously? What? Is that a real word or is that a typo? Apparently that's a real word. It,
Unctuously.
Unctuously. Oh, okay. Yeah, really. Unctuously. Decolonization is a word much and unctuously used by imperialist spokesmen to describe the transfer of political control from colonialist to African sovereignty. The motive spring of colonialism, however, still controls the sovereignty. The young countries are still the providers of raw materials, the old manufactured goods. The change in the economic relationship between the new sovereign states and the erstwhile masters is only one of form. Colonialism has achieved a new guise. It has become neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Its final bid for existence as monopoly capitalism or imperialism is the last stage of capitalism. And neo-colonialism is fast entrenching itself within the body of Africa today through the consultia and monopoly combinations that are the carpetbaggers of the African revolt against colonialism and the urge for continental unity. These interests are centered on the mining companies of South and Central Africa. From mining, they ramify into an involved pattern of investment companies, manufacturing concerns, public. From mining, they ramify into an involved pattern of investment companies, manufacturing concerns, transport, public utility organizations, oil and chemical industries, nuclear installations, and many other undertakings too numerous to mention. Their enterprises spill across the vast African continent and over the oceans into North Africa. Wait. Their enterprises spill across the vast African continent and over the oceans into North America, Australia, New Zealand, Asia, the Caribbean, South America, the United Kingdom, Scandinavia, and most of Western Europe. The connections, direct and indirect, are maintained with many of the giants of American industry and finance. They are supported by leading bankers, financiers, industrialists in the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, Germany, America, and elsewhere. The rotas of their directorates are filled with names that have a familiar ring for those who have the least knowledge of international finance and industry. Names like Oppenheimer, Hambro, Drayton, Rothschild, de Erlanger, Gillett, Lafond, Robiliard, Van der Straten, Hochschild, Chester Beatty, Patino, Engelhard, Timmins are ubiquitous. Others, equally powerful in the interests they dominate, avoid the publicity of lengthy lists of their directorships, either by complete absence from the pages of directories anxious to advertise their glories, or by coyly hiding their eminence behind a lonely announcement with name and address. It brought up the Rothschild name. These intricate interconnections of the great imperialist monopolies expose the real forces that are behind world events. They indicate also the pattern which links those events to the developing countries at different points of the globe. They reveal the duality of the interests that force the developing countries to import goods and services which are the products of companies combined in the monopoly groups directly exploiting their national resources or intimately associated with them. This is the double edge to the guillotine that cuts off Africa's wealth from Africa, to the greater enrichment of the countries which absorb her primary materials and return them to her in the form of finished products. In their newfound independence, it is to these very same monopolistic groups that the new African states are obliged to turn to supply the requirements arising from the need to lay the foundations for the economic transformation. The policy of non-alignment, whenever it is exercised, imposes the obligation to shop around. But since capitalism has come to the peak of monopoly, it is impossible for any of us to avoid dealing with monopoly in some form or another. It is in the nature of our arrangements with the monopolies that the freedom of or otherwise of the African states lies. Where we establish and maintain the integrity of our financial institutions and keep our basic projects free from imperial control, we leave ourselves room to maneuver away from the neo-colonialism that, unfortunately, has closed its grip upon countries whose independence is overshadowed by a heavy reliance upon extra-African associations. In this atmosphere, of relative freedom. The giant combines that open up industrial enterprises on our soil do so on arrangements that are well screened and are part of nationally planned advancement. The national banks are really national banks, formed and run out of the country's own resources, and our own financial and economic institutions are guarded against neo-colonial infiltration. Unhappily, these conditions are rare in Africa. Most of the territories pass into a state of national sovereignty in unviable circumstances that inhibit even a modicum of free movement within national limits. They could be overcome, but only within the combined strength that continental unity and a central connective socialist policy, free of attachments to other continents, could give. As things are, most of our new states, alarmed at the prospect of the harsh world of poverty, disease, ignorance, and lack of financial and technical resources into which they are thrust from the womb of colonialism, are reluctant to cut the cord that holds them to their imperialist mother. Their hesitancy is fostered by the sugared water of aid, which is the stopgap between avid hunger and the hoped for greater nourishment that never comes. As a result, we find that imperialism, having quickly adopted its outlook to the loss of direct political control, has retained and extended its economic grip, and thereby its political compulsion by artfulness of neo-colonialist insinuation. The increasing expansion of productive capacity and potential output of the advanced capitalist countries has its corollary in the necessity to export on a geometrically increasing scale the finished products of industry and the excess capital that could only further inflate competition at home, but brings rapid and high returns from the industrial starved new nations. Hence, the fevered jostling for position in these areas, as well as in that of raw materials monopoly, which is using Africa as the playground, not only of the Cold War, an aspect of the fight of capitalism for existence against socialism, but of the competitive struggle of international monopoly. North American imports into Africa rose from 10 to 3% in 1959 to 13 to 7% in 1962, while those from other Western countries and Japan remained the same or declined slightly. This corresponds to the increasing American investments in the continent's extractive industries and the growth of United States participation in the financial establishments on this continent. American banking houses are making inroads into territories formerly catered for solely by European and British banks. The French banks still dominate in the former French countries, and the Belgians in the Congo, but this is frequently a front for American participation. European financial advisors constantly counsel the African countries on the advantages that they can receive from remaining in association with the erstwhile mother country, while depreciating their possibilities of inter-African association. Much uh, sub, uh, much subtlety is employed by Lombard, the commentator of the Financial Times, in an article which appeared in the issue of February 6, 1964, of this influential London newspaper, a product of an industrial holding company which also produces The Economist. Lombard asserted that there is not much that African countries can do directly to help one another financially at this stage of their economic evolution. He is therefore glad to see that the independent African countries are now coming to recognize that it is very much in their own interest to preserve the monetary ties with leading European countries they inherited from their colonial days. They obviously entertained strong suspicion that the enthusiasm that their old mother countries were displaying for allowing them to remain within their monetary areas was motivated largely, if not wholly, by consideration of self-interest. And they are inclined to assume that this implied that their own purpose would be served best by following up political independence with its financial equivalent at the earliest possible opportunity. Lombard assured his readers that the Africans showed wisdom with the Secretariat of ECA, assisting the Organization of African Unity to implement its resolution on the possibility of establishing an African clearinghouse and payments union, had the good sense to seek the advice of the distinguished American monetary authority, Professor Triffin of Yale University. Need we be surprised that in his report the distinguished American professor pointed out that it would be most unwise lightly to condemn or break up financial arrangements with major trading companies and financial centers, as of course we might consider neo-colonial penetration, but to Lombard it is only one side of the picture. For there are two worlds, and the African countries should strive to get the best of both worlds by maintaining and even further developing the relations they have with the major international monetary areas, and at the same time binding their own financial self-help mechanisms. How is it possible to resolve two contradictions Lombard does not volunteer to explain? But what he does confess is that this unresolved two-way procedure would meet with nothing but the fullest approval from their African present monetary area associates. It says plenty, and we have difficulty in believing what it says. For the simple fact is that those who control the major international monetary areas are placing their time bombs within the self-help mechanisms of the African countries. For these mechanisms are controlled by the financial monopolists of imperialism, the bankers and financiers who have been very busy in the past few years setting up establishments throughout Africa, infiltrating into the economic heart of many countries and making with the most important enterprises that are being established to exploit the continent's national resources on a larger scale than ever before for their own private gain. Wait, that wasn't. That wasn't a complete sentence. Was that supposed to be a comma or something? So it's like, or was that not supposed to be there? So it's like throughout Africa. Maybe. Seems like it because that right there is not a complete sentence. It's not like a verb. There's no verb in there. I mean, this one would be it, but that comma's there, so it kind of breaks it up. I don't know. So it doesn't really feel like a complete sentence. Though the aim of the neo-colonialist is economic domination, they do not confine their operations to the economic sphere. They use the old colonialist methods of religious, educational, and cultural infiltration. For example, in the independent states, many expatriate teachers and cultural ambassadors influence the minds of the young against their own country and people. They do this They do this by undermining confidence in the national government and social system through exalting their own nations. Uh, they do this by undermining confidence in the national government and social system through exalting their own notions of how a state should be run, and forget that there is no monopoly of political wisdom. But all this indirect subversion is as nothing compared with the brazen onslaught of international capitalists. There is Here is empire, the empire of financial capital. In fact, if not in name, vast sprawling network of intercontinental activity on a highly diversified scale that controls the lives of millions of people in the most widely separated parts of the world, manipulating whole industries and exploiting the labor and riches of nations for the greedy and satisfaction of a few. Here resides the mainspring of power, the direction of policies that stand against the advancing tide of freedom of the exploited people of Africa and the world. Here is the adamantine enemy of African independence and unity, braced in an international chain of common interest that regards the likely coming together of the new nations as a major blow as at its continued domination of the resources and economies of others. Here indeed are the real workings of neocolonialism. Here indeed are the economic ramifications of the monopolies and combines. Their financial and economic empires are pan-African, and they can only be challenged on a pan-African basis. Only a united Africa, through an all-African Union government, can defeat them. End of chapter 2. Alright. So basically just the whole thing was how Africa should be united, and only a united Africa would be able to have the power, economic and whatnot, to throw off the yoke of colonialism finally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Oh, that one's pretty. That one's much shorter than the last one, which I think like 6 pages shorter. Yeah. What were the other chapter titles again? I don't remember. Obstacles to economic progress, Africa's resources, imperialist finance. I already went over that apparently in that second chapter. So it'd be interesting to see how different that is. Monopoly capitalism and the American dollar. Went over that a little bit. The truth behind the headlines. Ooh, that's gonna be interesting there. Get to talk about that fake news. That fake news media. Fake news, folks. Fake news. Fake news, folks. Fake news. You're fake news. Primary resources and foreign interests. The Oppenheimer Empire. Ooh. Foreign investment in South African mining. Anglo-American Corporation Limited. Boo. The Diamond Groups. I mean, we think of the movie Blood Diamond. That was a good movie. If anyone hasn't seen that, you should fucking see it. It was a great movie. Mining interest in Central Africa, companies and combines. The tin, aluminum, and nickel giants. Union Minere du Haut Katanga. Economic pressures in the Congo Republic. Oof. Monetary zones and foreign banks. New industries, the effects of primary producing countries. The mechanisms of neo-colonialism. Yeah, speaking of Blood Diamond being a good movie, that one and Lord of War is two I maybe think of that are good politically and involve Africa.